Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today a special Boxing Day edition to talk about the 11th round of the Cyclocross World Cup taking place in Gavere. With me here to do that is Issam. Merry Christmas, Issam.
Yes, Merry Christmas also to the listeners, and thank you for having me.
Christmas didn't come early this year, it came exactly on time with a fantastic race in Gavere. An amazing battle between the so-called Big Three, and these Big Three riders, Pidcock, Van der Poel, Van Aert, will also be racing in Benidorm later this year. You can buy your tickets for Benidorm with the code CXSocial and you can get a 20% discount on your tickets for Benidorm. Hopefully an as entertaining battle there as we had today in Gavere. The course was muddy, it was hard and the fans came out in big numbers. Tom van der Bos had the fastest start, but Van der Poel was eager to show something after his second place in Mol. He took over the lead and started putting the pace up super high. He paced hard, Pidcock managed to stay with him and Van Aert was distanced a bit. He was 10 seconds down. At the end of the first lap, Van der Poel had a puncture. He was luckily not too far from the pit zone and was able to change his bike and fit in with Van Aert. Pidcock was in the lead and Van der Poel thought this was dangerous and he immediately started pacing hard. For 2 laps Pidcock had a decent lead, but eventually he got caught again. The main difference here was that on the longest climb of the course Pidcock was riding whilst Van der Poel and Van Aert were running. Van der Poel and Van Aert were faster running than Pidcock was able to ride that climb. From there on we had an interesting battle between these three riders. We went back and forth for the best part of 2 laps. But in the 5th lap, Pidcock had first closed the gap to Van der Poel and then he cracked. Van Aert was unable to react to another attack of Van der Poel as well and Van der Poel stretched a gap of 10 seconds. Going into the final lap, the gap was 14 seconds. Van Aert tried to come back, came as close to 10 seconds but then eventually cracked. Van der Poel was able to take his 3rd World Cup win of the season ahead of Van Aert and Pidcock, who ended 3rd. Quite an entertaining race, Issam. What was your main takeaway from this race?
The way Van der Poel was riding today. From the start, determined guy, a guy that really wanted to set a note in this race. Even with the puncture, didn't really panic. There was some running today and he definitely wasn't the best runner, but he made sure that he wasn't losing that much time on his competitors. And during the whole race, there was not a single moment Van der Poel was in a lot of trouble. And, we have seen Pidcock, especially at the end of the race, Pidcock had some difficulties in the race, was, feeling a bit tired, I guess. Van Aert had his moments as well where where I was thinking that his race was over for the fight for victory and then came back and fought his way to second. I think that Van der Poel, over the course of the whole race, there was never really a moment where he was in a lot of trouble. There was a moment where Van Aert took over to chase Pidcock, and he was also the one that, took the lead in that chase of Pidcock in lap 3. But Van der Poel was always behind him, never let the gap become too much, and, was in control of the race, and that was truly, incredible to see.
Yeah, Van der Poel was riding with fire, with passion. Already in the first lap, he still needed to start on row 3, but he came storming to the front. He had something to prove, as you say, after Mol. I think he took that a bit personal and thought, well, I'm not going to let the Belgian media get too far ahead of themselves in writing that this is Van Aert time. I'm going to show them. This should be a Van Aert course based on the running, but still, I don't think we can really draw conclusions upon the form. Van der Poel was super eager to show something today, but I'm still a bit in the dark. What is the form level? They seem pretty evenly matched, but on the other hand, I would say this course favors Van Aert. The running here, well, it was a lot different than in Mol, but there was still quite some running. A lot of power sections. Van Aert normally does well on the power courses. I would have thought that it would have been the favorite here, especially after Mol, but on the other hand, the racing didn't disappoint. I've been hyping this race for the best part of 1.5 months, especially to see what Pidcock could do here. I think I even said it in the Christmas period preview, possibly a race of the season. I think so far it was the race of the season. Belgian crowds turned out in massive numbers. The road we saw in front of the entrance, it was insane. And yeah, I think it's definitely up there with best races of the season. Might depend a bit on personal preference, but for me it was the race of the season. Still a bit unclear on the form, but Van der Poel looked super eager today. where we could still say after Mol that he maybe let his head down a bit too quickly. None of that today. He wanted to prove something, and he certainly did.
Yeah, indeed. This was not the Van der Poel from Mol, but I think Van Aert today, there were definitely signs that he was not 100%. And I don't know why. He had some difficulties at the start where he had to change his bike, was a bit behind, but he came through that quite quickly. So there were no issues there. But Van Aert today was not, in my opinion, was not 100%. And I don't know what it is. He had some difficulties to get through the race. His facial expression was not always 100%. We don't know where the two stand, but what we do know is, that the next couple of races are going to be very interesting. And I think that, today Pidcock, despite the fact that he was third and behind these two, rode also a very good race, did everything he could on the course that definitely suits him as well. But in the end, just didn't have enough to fight the two in front.
I agree with you on Van Aert. I never had the feeling that he was really in a position to win the race. Like, he was consistently there, but the fact that most of the time he was hanging behind a couple of meters, couple of seconds, indicates to me that he either doesn't necessarily have the best form or necessarily had the best day. I would lean towards the second part. Form of the day is very important and it influences every race. We don't know why Van Aert wasn't feeling good, if that even was the case. I mean, people changed their opinion very quickly. After Mol, many people might have thought Van Aert had the upper hand. Now it turns around, Van der Poel might have the upper hand. But I think the truth is we just don't know where they stand. Maybe they are super evenly matched and Mol was an incident for Van der Poel that he didn't have his day, and Gavere was an incident that Van Aert didn't have his day. Or maybe Van der Poel is a bit better, maybe Van Aert is a bit better. We just don't know, and I don't have the confidence to say at this moment, well, Van der Poel or Van Aert is better. I will just need to observe the racing the upcoming 2 days to see how and what. Where do they stand? What is the trend? Because for now it's still 2 isolated races. But I do agree that Van Aert didn't make the strongest impression today.
Yeah, I have to say that after Mol, I was not so optimistic about the form of Van der Poel. I have to be honest. I'm not going to be here on the bandwagon of Van der Poel now and say that I expected him to bounce back from it. I think that that was also the idea from the majority. It's a surprise in a way, but also not. It's the champion. As a rider, is a great rider, and is a rider that that is capable of these kind of bouncing back on the course. Like you said, that is more suited to Van Aert in a way. But the next couple of races, I think Heusenzoll, there's a race that's fast, but also can give us some in-depth about the difference between Van der Poel and Van Aert. Diegem is not really a race that you can get a lot out of it, but it will say something. It will tell a story. And then, race after race, we have to see how the battle will unfold. But I think that the next couple of races are definitely going to be super interesting.
We have to give it to Van Aert though for, despite not looking in the best form, keeping his head down, keep trying the entire race. As I said, he was always there. He was never really in it, but he also wasn't out of it. And there was always this sense of, what is he doing? How come he's able to keep up? And they were never able to distance him. It's like, let's say you're climbing a mountain, for instance, the Ventoux, and you pass this amateur, and you think, oh, nice, I caught somebody, and then, he's constantly in your wheel, and then you think, oh, now I've dropped him, and then he comes back. Basically like how Almeida rides on the road. You think you've gotten rid of him, but he's never out of it. But at the same time, you never feel he's in it. But all it takes is one moment that you hesitate and he comes back and he can recover, and that could be deadly. So really impressive by Van Aert to keep going. Of course, he was encouraged by many Belgians. Unfortunately, a couple of Belgians who couldn't behave, not necessarily only against Van der Poel. Also, Van Aert got thrown beer at him in the final lap because he didn't beat him. There was a guy who put up the middle finger against Van der Poel. Unfortunately, we always have these people who can't take a couple of alcoholic drinks and start doing weird things. Too many people pushing the riders, but hey, big crowds, atmosphere was there. Props to Van Aert, and we can only say the same for Pidcock, because I don't think Pidcock could have done much more, although eventually he made a mistake in the final, or the penultimate lap it was. on the long climb, he had forgotten to shift back. It was in a too heavy gear to get away, and I think that even after that, after this tricky downhill with the big cushion, the climb there, he made the same mistake, and it's not the first time we've seen him do that this season. Remember, Overijse, a bit unfortunate, but hey, we move. Good race by Pidcock, 5 years younger, and yeah, I think he did all he could.
Yeah, and I think, he proved today, I don't think that he had to prove it, but he proved today that he's part of the big three. I think today was truly going at it with these guys, despite the fact, like you say, he's 5 years younger. It's something that we might forget when we talk about these three, but, today from his side, I think you could make an argument about the going on that long climb on the bike and staying on the bike while the others were running. Maybe he did it one time too many, but I think that overall the race was from his side. He had a good start. He sat behind Van der Poel. When Van der Poel had the puncture, he got that gap. He maintained it quite well. They came back, and just in the end, just didn't have the legs to follow them, I guess, and came naturally in that third position. And I think that from his side, a strong race, and he had to focus on the next couple of races and see what he can do there.
Yeah, I think that will be harder. I've been saying that Gavere is the best opportunity he has this season, and he came close, and it's something you should work on, those mistakes, because they are costly. In Overijse, it cost him the win. Here, it probably cost him a second place, although I'm not confident enough to say that he would have for sure ended second. He did what he could, and as you say, it was interesting that he was riding the long climb which the others were running. I think there was the theory of, I'm going to save my legs by doing so, because it was a pretty long run and he has relatively short legs. So I think that did not necessarily cost, yes, it cost him time, but it didn't necessarily cost him in terms of overall performance, because the lap was so long. Even within the lap, you saw fluctuations. He lost 6 seconds on the climb, but he was able to take 6 seconds later on the course. So I think that is like, you win some and you lose some. So I don't think that was necessarily a bad decision. Maybe a lap too long, but I don't think it would have mattered for the race. I always had the feeling that Van der Poel would close that gap to Pidcock at some point. That phase of the race reminded me a lot of the race in Namur in 2020. And then that's really where the first idea of the big three started in 2020, when Pidcock won here in Gavere, and then in Namur he was up there. But I think the whole concept of the big three is a bit silly. It's a bit of an unfair comparison as well, because Pidcock is certainly a much more one-dimensional cyclocross rider than Van Aert and Pidcock, or Van Aert and Van der Poel, sorry. Pidcock is very good on the climbing courses, but as he's a lot smaller and a lot lighter on the pure power courses, somewhat the faster courses, he will struggle compared to these two. Pidcock is also 5 years younger than Van der Poel and Van Aert. And of course, Pidcock has done great things on the road. But Pogačar, for instance, if he would come here, it would not become a big four. Pogačar raced a national race in Slovenia today, and he ended second behind the guy who barely finished inside the top 30 of a C2 cross in Italy with certainly not a deep field. So, yes, Pidcock is a very talented rider. Yes, I absolutely believe that in a couple of years' time he can become one of the best cross riders there are. Because if you are fighting with Van der Poel and Van Aert on a course that suits you, when you are 5 years younger, against these two, some of the best riders cross has ever seen, you are definitely a very talented young man, and that's very much what he still is. So he's doing well. The comparison, I feel like, is becoming a bit overblown and a bit too heated, with a lot of arguments on social media and between fans. Is Pidcock part of the big three or not, or is it the big two, or do we need to talk about a big one based on how much Van der Poel wins? I would just say let that rest, and that's why I always say the so-called big three, because that's how there's often referred to them. I would only speak about one big three, and that's the big three in the women's race, and we'll talk about them a lot more later on in this podcast.
Yeah, indeed. It's in a way, of course, it's a silly discussion. It's a discussion that that you cannot avoid in a way. Like you said, it's a comparison which is very difficult to set. All three of them have their own attributes where they're good at. I think Pidcock definitely, lacks on a couple of courses compared to Van Aert and Van der Poel, but he's also a bit younger, and with the years that that will come, and in a way that he will improve on that aspect for sure. And I think that in the end, especially for a race as today. If you really, if you can look at it as a neutral viewer, I think you would enjoy the race so much, because it was absolutely, just great to watch these guys go at it. If you are a fan of one of the three, try to enjoy the others as well, because it's just a spectacle. It's great to watch, and you will enjoy the racing much more.
Yeah, for sure. And don't become one of these salty fans that after a couple of beers puts their middle finger up or starts throwing their very expensive beers at the riders. Then just stay at home and don't go to the cross. So yeah, it was a good race. I certainly enjoyed it, and yeah, I will just start repeating myself if I continue too much, but just chapeau to all three at the front for giving it their everything and making the race super entertaining. Let's take a look at the entire top 10 then. Mathieu van der Poel with the win ahead of Van Aert and Pidcock. Dream podium for the organizers of Gavere. They also deserved that after they were shoved in February last year and had what was their worst edition ever. Fourth place for Michael van Toerenhout. Impressive race by him. In the first part of the race he was able to keep up with Van der Poel, Van Aert and Pidcock. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to keep those lap times as low as in the first half of the race, and he lost connection with the leaders, ended in a bit of a no man's land on fourth place, takes back a couple of points in the World Cup lead, but nothing too serious. Fifth place for Van der Haar ahead of World Cup leader Sweeck. Seventh place for Thibaut Nys ahead of Tom van den Bos and Cameron Mason. The top 10 is rounded out by Gerben Kuypers. I would like to make a small note on Gerben Kuypers. I still think Tormans should sign him, but in the Mol podcast I accidentally said that he was a last year under 23. He is in fact a first year elite. And then Issam, I think you would still like to say something about Thibaut Nys.
Yeah, I mean, today as well for Nys on a course like this, Gavere, tough course, he held himself well, and I think that after the training camp that he did, coming back, he came back in a very, very good form, and he showed it in Mol today as well, in Gavere. He's in a very good place. The form is there, and he's improving. So I think that for Nys today is a result, is a confirmation that he is in a very good form. It looked very good. He and Tom van den Bos, to be honest, because I think Van der Bos for the majority of the race was very close by and they were battling it out. And I think Van der Bos himself also had a very, very good ride. And, to be honest, that whole group there with Nys and Van der Bos, and you had Cameron Mason in 9th, Kuypers 10th. The talent is there, and it's coming. And on a course like this, it's difficult to keep going, but I think all of them did a very good job. But Nys came on top in the end.
Yeah, I don't think I really discussed this on the podcast before, but the reason that he had a bad period before he went to Spain, like around Beekse Bergen, like basically after the European Championships, the races didn't go all too well for him, with the exception of Overijse. The reason for that was the fact that he had an injury, it wasn't really an injury. The full story was, I read it in a newsblad, it was that he had a back injury a couple of seasons ago. I think that was the 2020-2021 season when he missed the Worlds team, and he had a back injury and needed to do a lot of core stability training in order to prevent that from happening again, and he did that. It worked last year. And then he, at some point this season, thought that he could better invest that core stability time by doing endurance training on the bike, and he stopped really taking that serious. And then the same injury came back again because he didn't take his core stability serious. He said that was his own fault, it was a stupid mistake. He learned from it, picked that up again, did some serious training in Spain, also trained with Trek Segafredo team on the road. And now he looks to be well and truly back. He's racing an insanely busy schedule from what I heard. I don't know the details, but I think he is on the start list for Diegem for sure. I'm not too sure if he's racing Zolder tomorrow. But busy period for him coming up. Started well with 7th in Mol, or 6th in Mol, and now 7th in Gavere. Good start for the season for him. And yeah, I look forward to see what he can do. I think he will certainly be one of the favorites for the Under-23 World Championships. Although then again, there are many other competitors there as well. Emil Verstringen, Johan Wieseuren, there are many names. Michiels, maybe Haverdings, although at the moment I would lean towards Nys, but we need to be very careful with that because things can fluctuate quickly. Then, final note on the men's race, I would like to say that Cameron Mason also put in a very good ride. He got his best result in a World Cup. He was also 9th in Overijssel last year, but this World Cup 9th place is much better because the competitiveness of the field is super good. He's the second top 10 of the season in terms of World Cups. He was 10th in Dublin before. Props to him. Then on to the women's race. Marie Schreiber had the fastest start, but she was quickly overtaken by Puck Pieterse. It looked to be a bit of a deja vu to Overijssel as Puck Pieterse opened a pretty big gap in the first technical downhill, but the course involved a lot of running, and when you say running, you do say Shirin van Anrooij. Van Anrooij caught up to Puck Pieterse, and we were looking in towards a duel between two. Fem van Empel, she didn't start the race, she was still injured, so we looked at a battle between the two other youngsters, Pieterse and Van Anrooij. However, Puck Pieterse had a mechanical. Her back wheel was completely jammed, it was blocked by mud and a lot of leaves. She needed to run for quite a while and found herself 45 seconds back. Van Anrooij looked to be leading comfortably, but that was without looking at her teammate Lucinda Brand. Brand, who of course had an injury earlier this season, came back from a bad first lap and caught up 20 seconds per lap until in the third out of just 4 laps she caught up to her teammate Shirin van Anrooij. For a quarter of a lap they were racing together, side by side, even getting their shoulders together at some point, but Van Anrooij stayed relatively cool. She was able to get her lap times down again as Brand started making mistakes, as she clearly paid the price for the effort she had to place to close that gap again. Van Anrooij stretched the gap in the final lap and was able to win her second World Cup of the season ahead of Lucinda Brand. In the background there was an interesting battle for third place. Blanca Vash was looking in pole position for that third place for a long while, but in the final lap she exploded. On the long climb she needed to get off her bike at some point, and there is just the one thing that doesn't go well for Blanca Vash, and that is running. She was passed by Backstedt, but also passed by Pieterse. Pieterse, who came back from that mechanical, also back from a 5th place, managed to overtake both Vash and Backstedt in the final lap to claim the 3rd spot on the podium. Van Anrooij with the win ahead of Brand and Pieterse. What's your thought on the win of Van Anrooij, Issam? Was it really a case of her being the strongest, maybe a bit too enthusiastic in the first part of the race, or did Brand really lose the race by having a bad first lap and then eventually paying the price in terms of effort needing to be put in to come back?
I think that Van Anrooij definitely wanted to break Pieterse in at the first lap and really wanted to make a gap, and maybe was a bit too enthusiastic in the beginning of that. In terms of Brand was, didn't have the greatest of first laps, and then slowly but surely came to the front. I think was very patient, but then the moment she actually saw that she could get to the front, I think was a bit too eager to get there, and maybe a lap too soon the move was made. Van Anrooij definitely struggled a little bit at the end, but was still not completely on her limit. She still had something left to finish, and that is also how you need to race. You need to make sure that you always have something left in the tank, and Van Anrooij had just that and was able to defend off Brand. And I think that in the end, a mature ride for Van Anrooij, in my opinion. I think that a lot of people would have cracked with Lucinda the way she came back. The gap was quite significant, and then it's quite a mental blow if somebody comes back from such a gap. But I think that Van Anrooij handled it quite well. Took the lead again, did what she does best in the running, and just overall was just going very good. And I think that in the end, from her side, it was a very, very strong race.
Yeah, I think Van Anrooij got ahead of herself at the beginning of the race. As you say, it looked like she was eager to crack Pieterse immediately. Pieterse was also distanced and eventually came back, but Van Anrooij was really going at it. Then really had 2 slow laps in laps 2 and 3, both around 12 minutes, and then eventually got her lap time down again in the final lap. On the other hand, I think Brand got ahead of herself in the chase. She was being cheered on by a crowd, by the team staff. She knew she was catching Van Anrooij. And I think she also got ahead of herself in doing so. She lost a lot of time in the first lap, 35 seconds, and then took back 15 or almost 20 seconds in the second lap. And then she kept pushing hard and she was running hard. I think she blew up there because once she had caught up to Van Anrooij, she took the lead. Okay, good decision. But the mistakes she started making after that looked to be more caused by tiredness than technical error. It looked to me that she was just tired and had blown up and therefore was never really able to fight with Van Anrooij for long. I mean, that quarter of a lap that they were together, that was entertaining, and it was really nice that we had this shot of this camera with Sven Nys actually shouting something to Brand, a technical tip that she needed to cut back the corner, wide entry, sharp turn, and that Brand was doing exactly that. That really added to the dynamic. That was nice to see, but in the end, yes, we saw very good Lucinda Brand, by far the best Brand we have seen since that hand injury. Maybe even the best Brand of the season, although she did look very good in the opening of the season, Waterloo, Fayetteville. But it was definitely good. The signs are there, and I think what we need to conclude from this is that Baloise Trek, their female riders, Van Anrooij and Brand, who went on a training camp with the Trek women's team, that they really came back in an improved form from team camp, because this is not something we saw Van Anrooij or Brand do before they went on the training camp.
I think that training camp of Baloise is something that some riders need to visit, because it clearly works, and they both came back stronger than they were. I think for Brand, today was a course where she definitely could use her power a little bit more, but she also surprised me in a way, I have to say. It was a very strong ride, a bit earlier than I expected, and that can, I think that the Brand is ready to improve more and more in the next coming races, and that we shouldn't be surprised if a victory is coming out of this Christmas period. But I think that both Baloise Trek Line women were very good today, and did what they had to do. The maximum was probably achieved by both, and I think that Sven Nys can definitely be very happy with both riders.
Yeah, he can be, and I think they, of course, deserve to end where they end, but at the same time we need to note that Pieterse did have a mechanical issue, and yes, this is completely part of the sport. Pieterse herself said that it was even her own mistake, because both she and Van Anrooij didn't ride into the pit, and she learns from that every race, she said, and that's fair. Like, it's part of the sport. This was clearly an error. She should have changed earlier, but it is important to note that in terms of form, Pieterse is on the same level as Van Anrooij. Pieterse was able to keep the gap relatively constant, was certainly faster than Backstedt and Vash, and eventually ends 50 seconds down, because in the final lap there was not much more on the line once she had secured that third spot. It's a shame for her, because now she takes 25 points. That's a net gain of 25 on Van Empel, but if she had gained 40 points, the gap would have only been 25 points in the overall. So with 3 races left, that meant that if she had won all 3, she would have won the World Cup. Of course, we don't know what the current situation of Fem van Empel is. She's not racing Zolder tomorrow. That is already an indication that things aren't going amazing. Currently, she is set to ride Baal, then Kokzijde, and then after Kokzijde she is set for Zonhoven, then Nationals, Benidorm, Besançon, Worlds. So it's interesting to see in what form Van Empel comes back. From what I've seen, there's not been all too much riding going on, and it's mainly recovery focused. So that could be a bit of a hit, and then Pieterse can of course still put it off. But now she's still looking at a deficit of 40 points, which means that she will need to have Fem van Empel end significantly lower than her a couple of times. She doesn't have it in her own hand anymore to win the World Cup. But this happens. It's part of the sport. She can only blame herself, I think, for not taking that extra bike.
Yeah, definitely. That's you can only blame yourself for such a decision that you take during a race, and it was a vital decision in the end because it influenced her result, I think. Pieterse definitely in the first lap, it didn't look good, but like you said, the lap times in the end tell a story that she was roughly equal to Van Anrooij. So then you have to conclude that at least second place was definitely possible. And for the World Cup, it's definitely an interesting point, because we don't know if Van Empel is going to start in Zonhoven, but probably will be, I think, in the new colors of Jumbo. So, and the races that are coming up with the Zonhoven, with the Besançon and Benidorm, difficult. I think that those are races that suit Van Empel just a little bit more. So, we shouldn't be taking conclusions already, but it definitely is going to be more difficult after today.
They might suit Van Empel, but then again, if she's coming in here in poor form due to that injury, a lot can change. It would be a shame for Van Empel if she can't top off what really is her breakout, or, well, not really her breakthrough season, because that was last year. Really the season where she made that step to the top. If she can't crown that off with a World Cup win or a world title. But on the other hand, again, also crashes are part of the sport. Of course, we don't wish it to anyone, but yeah, these things happen, and we can only wait, and there's no reason to speculate. We'll see in Baal, or else we'll see it later in Koksijde, Zonhoven. Whenever she comes back, we'll see what her current form is, and we can see how she goes from there. Things for her teammate, Elie Iserbyt, who didn't start the men's race, look quite a bit less serious. Iserbyt, I think, really used that crash as a good way out of racing the World Cup here in Gavere, so he could instead focus on the Super Prestige and X2O trophy tomorrow, racing in Zolder, day after in Diegem. I would say that Iserbyt probably used it as an excuse to find a way out of today's race, which would have been super hard for him, and he can stay a bit fresher. Whereas Van Empel, the fact that she's also skipping tomorrow indicates to me that for her it's really a case of recovering. Let's look at the entire top 10 then. Van Anrooij with the win ahead of Brand and Pieterse. Then, very weird seeing this. 3 non-Dutch riders on 4, 5 and 6. Backstedt ahead of Vash and Honsinger. 7th place for Worst ahead of Bakker and Van Alphen, with the 10th place going to Inger van der Heijden. Let's talk a bit about Backstedt and Vash, who were locked in for a battle for 3rd with Pieterse. We already mentioned that Pieterse did what she could in terms of recovery and form to quite easily still take that 3rd place, but what was up with Vash this race? Because things looked much better than in Val di Sole and in Antwerp, of course, but that just went up and down, good, bad, and then in the final lap, ultimately it ended terrible when she needed to get off that bike and run up the climb, because she lost 20 seconds there alone.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, we established that running is definitely not something that she likes to do, and in Gavere you're forced to run several times on the course, and some sections are a little bit longer than others, but I would say it was a weird race in a way. She definitely, like you said, she looked actually quite good for the majority of the race, and it fluctuated a little bit. At a certain point she was actually closing up, and then she was losing time a little bit again, and so, it fluctuated a little bit, but in the end, the last lap I already knew that it was going to be a little bit difficult to hold both Pieterse and Backstedt off, especially with the long running section that you have on the climb, and she kind of swore to not get off her bike, and then eventually when she had to go off her bike, it was more walking than running. It's trainable. I don't think that it is something that that riders just have. You can definitely train these things, and it's a bit of a shame to see somebody lose, in my opinion, a secured 3rd place over something that is definitely something that you can improve on. Just the smallest of improvements today would have helped her to secure 3rd place, and I think that those opportunities, you're not gonna get them every time. But yeah, it was a weird race in my opinion. I don't know how you look at it, but for me it was, I didn't really know what to. Sometimes I was more laughing than anything else.
Yeah, well, my theory is just that they only did 4 laps because the lap times were 12 minutes. But my theory is more that they you couldn't really spot trends between laps all too much due to how long they were, but within laps, I think Vash was just losing a lot on the sections that you needed to run. But on the other hand, her eagerness to not get off the bike and keep pushing probably also helped her at some points, because I thought, whoa, pretty impressive that you're able to ride this. So there was probably some determination in her to not get off that bike. But as you say, her running is like terrible. We saw it in Antwerp already when she was like walking when the others were running at the end of lap 1. And then I was like, maybe she blew up, but it's actually just the fact that she's a terrible runner. So I would say that's definitely something that needs to be worked on, because if you want to become a complete cross rider, which I think she still wants to, at least I don't know why SD Works else would invest a lot in Lars Boom. Okay, of course he's also a director sportief on the road, but they pay him all winter to go to these races and be a personal coach for Vash. Something needs to change regarding to that, because her fluctuations within the lap looked to be the sections where she needed to run. She lost a lot of time and then she was able to regain again on other sections, whereas Backstedt was doing the complete opposite. She was racing like a complete cross ride. She had the power, she had the physique for running, she looked all right on the technical sections. And then again, she's just a first year under 23. A 4th place here is super good. It should be no huge surprise that she performs well here. Earlier this year in February, she almost ended on the podium here. She was still almost a year younger than she is now. So, is it a huge surprise? No, it's still above expectations. I would have thought that maybe Honsinger and Backstedt would have swapped places today, but still, we need to conclude that Backstedt is making significant progression. She also came back in good form from her training camp. Honsinger also in better form, although it looks to be a bit more difficult for Honsinger this season compared to last season. Her own theory is that the level has gone up much higher, and I do think I would agree with her, because with Pieterse, with Van Anrooij, with Van Empel all making big steps, Brand not going anywhere, young riders like Backstedt and Vash coming through, I would argue that Honsinger maybe has improved compared to last year, but that the overall level has just become a bit higher, and that for Honsinger, instead of fighting for podiums on courses that suit her, it's now become fighting for top 5s on courses that suit her. Kind of a similar trend that we've seen with Betsma, who unfortunately has also been experiencing difficulties with what looks to be an ever increasing level on the women's side of the sport.
Yeah, it's definitely visible that the level on the women's side is it's getting also a little bit wider. So we have more women that can compete for top 5, and that is obviously, yeah, with the smallest of margin in a sport where the smallest of margins definitely count. It's more and more difficult to get those positions, and I think that today Honsinger definitely rode quite a good race. I think that the difference between her and Van Anrooij at the front was, there was a gap, but it was quite a consistent gap, and it grew consistently. There was no big fell off in any way, shape, or form. So I think that overall Honsinger, had a very good race. I can still say that I expected a little bit more, but I think that overall from her it was definitely a very strong race, and she has to wait for races that will suit her as well, because like you said, Gavere is definitely one of those races that suits her, and then you have to wait for the next one.
And let's be clear, 6th place is definitely not bad. If you're 6th in a World Cup, it means you're one of the best riders of the world. And sure, Betsma and Alvarado weren't here, both prioritizing the other races over the World Cup, which I can understand. It's super busy, and with 10 races in 17 days, you need to make choices. So you, in fact, also don't need to have all the best riders at the start of every race. So, yeah, that's fine. For the rest, I thought in the top 10, not too many interesting names. Aniek van Alphen maybe a bit below expectations after the expectations got raised after her win in Boom, but I would say that this is where she would normally end. I would say maybe outside of the top 10, I would still like to mention Madigan Munro. It's her first race on this side of the pond this season. 12th place is a very good result for her. She's still an under 23 rider, and for an American to come over and then face the jet lag and the other things to then end 12th. Very good race for the young American, and we know that her priority might be at the mountain biking side of the sport, but still, she always seems to be love doing cross, and for Trek it's important to have an American on one of their bikes, so things are going nicely for her. Well, Issam, then I think we have had it. I think that will be it for Gavere. We'll be back tomorrow with a podcast about Zolder.
Yeah, that's going to be a check, and up to the next one. Thank you for having me.
2 down, 8 to go. Thank you for being here. And as said, we will be back tomorrow discussing the Super Prestige in Zolder. Thanks everyone, and goodbye.